Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in. I'm Robbie.
I'm Jason.
And welcome to the table. We are so excited to have you guys here. We have a special guest joining us. If you've seen the pattern that we're trying to build here, I feel like when you create consistent listeners, you want to create some rhythms for people to get used to. Standard episodes, and then maybe if we're going to do special episodes, we talk about at the top of the 10s, we're doing our lists. And on the 5s, we want to bring in amazing guests for our listening opportunity. And sometimes when you're working with guests, you got to make sure that you're willing to be flexible so you get the right person on at the right time. So here we are, special guest, episode 26, Jason, the only one joining from not Alabama, it seems. So roll tide to that. We've got a special guest here. James, welcome in, sir.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, I'll give a little background on James if that's all right, because
Sure.
we're almost it's a funny statement. We're almost like family because my brother and sister-in-law Christopher and Mandy, who we talk about in pretty much every episode, because almost every game Robbie and I've talked about with them, are like lifelong, super close friends with James and Sandra, his wife, and his kids. And so I almost feel like James's family. And James is very active on social media, so if you follow him, you'll get to know him as well. And he was one that is a true statement, James. When we start talking about guests, I mean, of course, we want to do like Jamie Stegmeyer and Tom Vassell and Rodney, but like, there's no doubt because I know somebody through proxy in the game industry who's very open and transparent. We definitely wanted to have you on, so we're excited to have you here today. James is, like you said, he's in Tuscaloosa, just moved back from California. The greatest thing about James, forget board games, he's a Disney fan and he's an Alabama fan. Roll Tide all the way.
Roll Tide.
Check. Good. I'm glad I didn't have to hear any War Eagle or any of that kind of stuff. Because then my internet would have just suddenly had issues. I wouldn't have been able to continue. There would have just been issues,
Yeah. James is also, what I didn't say is, and we'll probably come up a little bit, but James is an owner of a company called Druid City Games. I want to call it Druid City Hills because of Tuscaloosa. Published a ton of great games. One that I forgot about that we've never talked about, Robbie, but called Sorcerer City. One of the most overlooked tile laying games that are out there. Real time tile laying. So good. So I'm in the alternate location, but I even had my Druid City games up on my shelf just to show it off, but I'm not there right now because I had to record from the warehouse. Another one that I love, James, is a Barnyard Roundup. Like you designed yourself, right? It's a great bluffing game. We've used it so much to teach bluffing to folks. Fantastic game. And the latest one that just cracked is almost in the top 100, Wonderland's War, amazing art, bag building, just fantastic stuff. That's one that it's near the top of the list to play with Robbie at some point because it's just so amazing.
Sure.
James, welcome to have you here. Thanks, man.
Yeah, glad to be here. Yeah, no, I would definitely like to always put a plug in for Sorcerer City because people heard the words real time and I didn't know, but apparently that is a trigger for a lot of people to just automatically remove that game from their purview. And I've played a lot of those frantic-y type real-time games, and I don't like those either, really. I mean, they're not my preference. I'll try anything once, but our real-time is there mostly just to keep the rails on the game because when we didn't have the real-time or the timer, when you're like drawing these tiles, you can spin it, and then look at the 18, 20 different places you could put it. And let me tell you, if you think you've got a friend that you play games with who has AP, let them play Sorcerer City with no timer. Then you're just like, I want to claw my eyes out. So it was always there just to put the rails on it. And it definitely got an unfair negativity around it because of that. But the reason I loved it was because when Scott Caputo showed it to me, I was like, there's nothing like this. Yeah. There's not a deck building tile laying game. That's never been done before. And I like when designers do stuff like that.
Yeah, you're so right because it's the Robbie. So what Sorcerer City is? It's as James said, it's a tile laying game, but you're basically deck building. You're buying more tiles as you go, and you have a certain amount of time to lay these tiles out, and you essentially score on how the tiles go out. But it never feels, and you're so right, James. It never really feels frantic. Yeah, there's a time limit. But it's not like some of the other games you talked about, James. You never feel that maybe the last round because you're trying to min-max your placements. But then when the monsters come out and start, because there's some monster tiles that start destroying some of the tiles, it's really cool and cause a little chaos, but in the best way possible. It's one that because I own so many games, I forget about games I have, right? But then when we were prepping for this episode, I'm like, Sorcerer City is such a good game that gets overlooked because I like tile laying and I like deck building those kinds of things. So we'll have to play that, Robbie. We may play that when you come up this week for sure. Now it's on our head.
I was going to say you're scratching 2 itches for me when I think of the big three for introducing people to the games, which obviously what we're going to kind of discuss today. Carcassonne stands at the absolute top for me. Like I would play it over TTR any day of the week personally, and I know Jason and I balance each other because he's near opposite, and Catan finds a nice middle for us. But and then I love deck building. We'll see when we talk about games we've been playing lately. I am so invested in deck building. I come from a TCG background, so give me. Yeah, it sounds like it's right in my alley. Excited to check it out.
Well, it's funny you mentioned both of those because, like, when I describe the game typically to people, it's like Dominion meets Carcassonne with a sprinkle of Galaxy Trucker because the monsters do add a little bit of chaos.
That's it.
Just a sprinkle, just a little.
But right, not in a bad way, because Galaxy Trucker could be so vicious. My wife refuses to play it because it can be so destructive.
Yeah.
The sprinkle, that's a good analogy. That's how I would definitely describe Sorcerer City. So, hey, so speaking of games we played lately, I'm going to jump right into mine if you guys are good with that.
Fire away.
So my youngest son, Ryder, just moved back we all live in Lynchburg, Virginia. All 3 of my kids go to Liberty, so we live in the same town, but they still live on their own in their apartments. Ryder just moved into his apartment, and I said, what game do you want to play last? He chose Dinosaur Island. Probably my all-time favorite game, one of my top 2 or 3 all-time favorite games. And so we budgeted out. But for the first time ever, I'll step back. I've said this before in the podcast. It was actually Christopher Mandy many years ago who showed me Dinosaur Island. I loved it. And it's the only game I've ever actively hunted for the Kickstarter edition because I missed the Kickstarter on that. And so I eventually found a really good deal on the Kickstarter a couple years ago. So I have the Kickstarter and the expansion. And so we played with every single module of the expansion, which is a lot of modules, but it's really great. If you know the game, it just adds so much more stuff to it. And I'll just say this, Ryder absolutely destroyed us. I sent Robbie the screenshot of it. He scored like 170 or 180, and I think Elizabeth and I had like 90 and 80. Ryder's my gamer, but he absolutely destroyed us. But I had a fun game the whole time because I had the ability to play 4 specialists, which I always like specialists because I like that additional ability. But we had a good time playing Dinosaur Island, and even for us, it was like an hour and a half long game because we just know it so well. We don't really have to think about it, and we move through it. James, I assume you've played Dinosaur Island before?
Yeah. It's been a couple of years, but played it, love it. Anything that gives me Jurassic Park vibes, I'm usually going to be there for it. So yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. James, do you want to go next? I'll kind of wrap this out.
Sure. I just coming back from Gen Con, I got a chance to play Middle Ages. Middle Ages is being distributed from Hachette Games. I think it's actually, they typically bring things in from Europe and overseas. But so Middle Ages is essentially if a gamer got a hold of King Domino and ratcheted up quite a couple notches. I love King Domino. It's one of my, I grab that box and take it with us when we're going to dinner and we play rounds of that with the kids. And so if you're not familiar, it's just a drafting game. There's tiles that have different kind of values on them with different landscapes, and you're just essentially putting them together to try to get the best combination of things. But the crux is the lower number of valued ones are not very good, and the higher number ones are great, and they get put in ascending order. And so then as you draft, you have to take a piece off of the one that you're getting and go ahead and place it for the next round, essentially. And so you can go first, which will let you pick first in the next round following. But then you skip over the higher values. And if you get a higher value tile, you're going to go last on the next round to pick, which means you're probably going to get the leftovers. So you're constantly balancing do I want a good tile right now, but I'm going to probably pick poop later, that sort of thing. And so Middle Ages, what it's done is almost the same thing, but there's 7 categories. They have different ways that they score. And things kind of start ping-ponging, engine building, tableau style off of each other, but it still plays in 30, 40 minutes. So the art's gorgeous, and the way that the tiles fit together on your little tableau in front of you, they kind of lock together like a puzzle piece, which just visually looks cool. Yeah. Obviously, if anybody's bought any of my games, they know that I'm into theme, art, and production. So if you've got a food chain magnet style game in front of me, I'm less interested. Just because it looks like a spreadsheet.
Yeah. Does Middle Ages come in like a smaller, like a King Domino sized box, or is it a bigger box?
It's a little bigger, but it's not drastically bigger. It's what I call like a bookcase game where it's a little taller rectangular box, but
Okay.
it's not a huge box now.
Yeah, King Domino is a favorite in our house as well. My wife is a children's librarian, and at the library she's at, they have a really sizable board game collection that people can check out. And the teens or in the like adult fiction section, but they also, her children's section is very large. So they have a bunch of games as well. And we've hosted a couple like family game nights at the library. And King Domino is usually one that I end up sitting at a table and just bringing like a mom and dad and their child. And I play with them and they're like, oh, this was fun. And then they get up and leave. And then another mom, dad, and child sit down. I've never thought about King Domino. I think it would fit like perfectly under a car seat, and just having a car copy is such a good idea.
Yeah, we've got 3 or 4 of those type of games that just usually stay in the to-go bag or in the trunk of a car. We got War of Ages. It's a little dice game from Bruno Cathala. Deep Sea Adventures from the Oink one. Like that's Push Your Luck's always fun. So yeah, we've got several of those. And then I've got my quiver. I don't know if you guys own quivers, but I've broken down like 12 games, got them into a quiver. So like if I know we're going to be somewhere for a while, I'll just grab the quiver and bring, that whole loot of games.
Yeah. I don't have a quiver yet, but I think I have the games to do it. I just haven't broken down to build those together. I have to admit my sin here, my little confessional. I've never played King Domino ever. Oh. I hear nothing but great things about it, but it's just never, I've moved so, not that light games are bad, right? But most games I buy now are typically heavier games. And so it's not necessarily something I'm looking to get, but it sounds great. The Middle Ages version of that sounds cool as well. But I know King Domino gets so much love that I need to do it.
My face of disapproval. I've swung the other way. I love a heavy game, but I find it at this stage in my life daunting to read a 40-page rule book and get it set up and to get the people in my house excited to sit through a 40-minute teach on a game. So I've just found myself buying lighter and medium heavy-ish games. That's primarily. And then I'll have a board game day where we bring people over, which is what I'm going to have to do now. Like that's the other part of moving, right? I lost Shu and Christina do Going Analog podcast.
Oh, yeah. Love the podcast.
They live 2 streets over. I could walk.
Oh my God.
The game night.
I saw all their photos of game days. I was always jealous because they have such big game days and game nights. I was like, that's awesome.
Yeah, they've got an incredible setup for that, and it's kind of like their gift. The hosting is a gift for them, and Shu does he goes above and beyond to make I want the number of people there to be perfect. So we have 4 people at every table, so we don't have any weirdness. We don't have any 5 or 6 player games because then you've been in those situations where you're like, well, we've got 6 and I've got these 3 games that we could play, and then somebody's like, well, we could break into 2 tables of 3, and there's always one person. I don't want to do that. I came here to play with all of y'all. And you're like, great, fine. So we're gonna play one of these 3 games that I've got that can play all of us, or we're gonna play party games. So
that's the tough thing for us because I host a few game nights when we have disc golf friends in town, but more often than not, it devolves to party games because we have so many people. And so the challenge is definitely there because we're hosting game night next week here at the warehouse. And some of them are gamers. So I'm going to have some of the just ones and the blank slates, but I want to bring some heavier games to do those kind of things. But going back to your point, James, I'm an empty nester now. So when my kids were in the house, yes, we had a couple of my Ryder likes heavy games. Hannah, my daughter, my middle one's half and half, and Xander could care less about heavy games. So we went way, when I say lighter, it was just lighter frame, right? The stuff that was easy to teach, easy to play in 30 to 40 minutes. But now that we're empty nesters, we have no problem sitting down with the 2 of us to play a 2.5, 3 hour game. And Robbie will be up here next week. So we'll spend each night playing a heavy game, one heavy game a night and maybe a lighter game a night as well.
Yeah, I will. I'll pack King Domino.
Okay,
that way we
there you go. There you go. I can check that off my list.
Fix the problem.
Yeah, because it also, like I said, it'll play really well at game night. If it's there are a bunch of people and they're mid blank slate. Okay, cool. While the 3 of us are chilling, we're gonna pop over here and we're gonna play King Domino because you can fly through it. My sister-in-law still holds it against me. We had the first time she ever played King Domino. We got to the end of it, and my wife had I can't remember it's like the dark brown tiles that are worth so many points. And she is like wastelands, or like we call them mudlands. But she had those, and there's one available, and my sister-in-law has first pick, and she like purposely doesn't grab that tile. And I was like, you're just handing Lindsay the win. Like, what are we doing? What are we doing? And turns out I was wrong, as I am many times in my life. And she grabbed the tile she needed and ended up winning the game anyways. So
there you go.
Way to go, Happy. So game I've been playing recently, not a surprise, but I wanted to talk about it in a different twist, is Lorcana. You guys know I found this game a month ago, and I am heavily invested into it. In fact, my wife was out of town for quite a bit of time, and so when she came back, she was like, wow, you really have gone a little deeper into this, because I've got the deck boxes now and all that. But what I'm trying to do is I go to a local league every week. I've been enjoying playing in that. So I have like competitive meta decks that I've been playing. For those of you who are unaware in the TCG world, essentially you end up with these like people who are way smarter than me coming together, looking at all the cards that are available. And they're like, if I pair this from set 1 with this from set 3, suddenly it's just magically overpowered. And you're like, awesome. Okay. So those are meta decks. That's kind of like what most people at large group gatherings end up playing because nobody wants to lose. But Lorcana, at its theme, is a Disney trading card game, which is so fun because there's so many awesome themes inside of trading cards. And my wife is never going to join me for going to local leagues or anything like that. She just wants to play and have a fun time. So I, inspired by Magic, who I was not a Magic player, they have those commander pods where people will roll up with 4 decks balanced against each other. They all are commanders, and it's just a good time. I'm building that amongst Lorcana, and I'm just building 4 themes. So my wife and I got to test out. I finally have completed several of those decks. And so last night we had princesses versus pirates at our house. And had a phenomenal time with it. The brooms were sitting on the side, sweeping away, waiting for their chance to dive in. So creating a little pod for it, super fun. I almost actually, James, my brother lives in Indy, and I almost sent him to Gen Con, like bought a ticket for him to go get some of the Lorcana stuff while he was at Gen Con. Or because he wasn't going to go, but he was.
He would have to love you a lot because the lines for anything Lorcana are pure insanity. I'm sure. So.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Well, y'all, we haven't just been playing games. We wanted to bring James on to talk about a really fun topic. I think it's one thing that we want to do when we bring guests on is not just have like a traditional interview or a traditional, hey, this is just a regular episode. We want to talk about a specific topic. And Jason, you want to talk about what today's episode's about?
For sure. So like I said this earlier, James has published a variety of games. He's published some heavier games, published some super light games, talk about Barnyard Roundup. He has Tidal Blades 2, which is an RPG based kind of co-op game coming out as well. Isn't that right, James? Is it? Or there's an RPG along with Tidal Blades 2 that you can have. It's a separate thing.
That's right.
Yep. And then so James has a variety of games, very active on social media, and between his time in board game basically on all the social media platforms, he's very opening to get gamers out there. So I thought it's great with his experience and kind of what our podcast follows is that we're going to mention what's one game we bring to the table to bring non-gamers to teach them to the hobby world. So maybe they've played Monopoly, Sorry, Risk, something like that. What is one game we always go to and maybe add a couple others? And then secondly, what's that one game we use to bring them from, okay, you've played now this entry level game. Let's take it up one notch, level up for their gameplay, just see where we go from there. So I'm going to go first if you guys are good with that. So it's interesting, Robbie, when I was thinking about all the games I would talk about, it's basically our entire list of every episode we've done because our podcast is very focused on getting non-gamers into the gaming world and helping newer gamers understand some of the next level of games. So I could have easily gone with Quacks or Cascadia, which are the 2 ones people associate with us almost more than any other game. But the one I'm going to talk about is Century Golem Edition. There's also one called Century Spice Road. I know, Robbie, I've taught you this game. So in the Century series, at least the first one, the gist of the game is you're playing cards to get gems or playing cards to upgrade gems. And then eventually you're buying golems. So you play a card to do something, or then you turn gems in to buy a golem. That's it. For those who listen to the podcast know, I like playing cards that do things, but the gameplay of it is so simple and so easy to understand that, yeah, there's always a little level of strategy, but like which golem am I going to shoot for? Do I upgrade this 2 times, or upgrade 2 different gems up from one to the next? Because you have 4 different gem colors, and your cards can either get you gems or can either upgrade those gems. So there's a little bit of strategy, but the gameplay, anybody could just come down and sit and do it. And the reason I like that for the Golem edition is because the art is very cool. Like, the different golems have different kind of themes to them. And if they're not used to thinking that, they think about Monopoly or Sorry, this kind of a basic black and white kind of very dull art. When you go into Century Golem edition, the art is striking, and it's very cool, and it's very vibrant. The gems in there, their little plastic pieces of their gems are very cool. So now you have the tactile nature of what gaming can be, as well as the metal coins. And it's a game that's not that expensive. They like it enough to play. We've never covered it as a featured game on Bards, but I know we've talked about it before as games we've played lately. So to me, it's easy to go to Century Golem Edition for one of those entry level games. I think let's just rotate through and talk about our non-gamers for our first one, and then we'll come back through to do a set game if we're good with that. So James, what is a game you use, or a couple of games you use to teach, kind of bring the non-gamers into our world?
Well, I've got a bit of a preamble before I tell you my game. All right, because I feel like I see this happen a lot. There's threads on social media. I probably spend too much time on there. Also, I've seen it in person when experienced gamers feel like they're bringing something that's basic, right? And they're like, we're going to play, I don't know, something that we would put like at a 2.5 or a 2.0, say on BGG, right? And I think there's a delta that, you know, when you're really familiar with games, your perspective is very skewed on what is something that's beginner, because a lot of people who are literally brand new to board gaming, and that's where I took this cue from. It's like literally maybe their experience is Scrabble, Monopoly, Risk maybe, right? More than likely just Monopoly or whatever, or Hungry Hippos, right?
Right.
Hungry Hippos is a board game, guys. Even though it's just mostly an activity, it's still, that's to the normal populace, that's a board game.
Yeah.
And so when you're like, here, let's sit down, let's play Power Grid, right? People their eyes are gonna go cross, right? So the way that the brain is used to, we call it, when we're designing games, cognitive load, right? The cognitive load that we're putting on somebody with the rule set. We think about this even when we're explaining, say, something is complicated for us as Wonderland's War. That's a 26, 28 page rule book. So the cognitive load that I want to put on somebody who's brand new is almost nothing. But I want to give them like a little spice, a little taste of like, so that we can take them further. And so, like, my examples are like typically a game like Just One.
Yep.
I've also used Tapple, and then I've also used Nana. And Nana has been a huge hit because everybody growing up as a kid played the matching games, right? Oh, I'm looking for the other turtle. Oh, I didn't find it. I found the elephant. Now I know where the turtles and the elephant's at. Right now I got to remember it. The whole flipping matching game. And so for somebody to just gamify that, like, actually a great story. My sister, hopefully she probably won't listen to this, so I can talk openly. Not a gamer, and was militant against gaming. Anytime I would bring games to the family Christmas get together, do you want to play? And it wasn't just no, thank you. It was no. You know, like, there's some trauma back there. I wasn't a part of it. I didn't play games growing up either. I don't know what happened, but whatever, right? And so I'm playing this with the cousins, you know, the people that would normally play with me last Christmas. And I was like, Heather, come here. It's like, here, I need to go to the bathroom. Will you just play my hand for me? I totally set it. It was like a total setup. I was like, all you're doing is just trying to, I know this one's at right here. Just try to match it to this card. And so I come back and I'm like, can I get my cards back? She's like, no, I'm playing this now. And I even got the other 3 or 4 holdouts in the family after they saw her go in and do it. Because anytime I think we can make a connection with a happy memory, which, like, matching games are always fun when we were growing up, it's really easy. And I think so, like, we were at Gen Con, having a conversation with a waiter before Gen Con started. Guys asking us questions about board gaming. He always comes around to, what's some of your favorite games? What's something I could check out? And I mean, of course I could tell him Wonderland's War or Blood Rage or whatever, but I was like, you should go check out just one.
Yep.
And he was like, what's that? And I'm like, I'll explain it to you in 10 seconds.
Yep.
And I think being able to, I told him about it and I was like, literally, you're ready to play. Like if I had it here in front of us, we would be playing. We could play around before you need to go back to the kitchen and get in trouble. We need to think about those sort of things. If you're, I just see a lot of selfish people who are like, well, I still want to play something that I want to play.
Yep.
Right. And it's kind of like a DJ at a party. A DJ doesn't go and play their favorite music at a dance for, whatever. They play the stuff that they know is going to get booties on the floor. We need booties on the floor. We don't need your favorite, DBM or whatever, right? Or if you're a metalhead, I'm a metalhead. Nobody wants to listen to that unless you're a metalhead. So anyway, all right. There was my rant.
I think it's perfectly justified. I when I think about the newer gamers, I think of, in a similar setting to your sister, I think of my mother-in-law, who I can come up and be like, all right, we're going to play taco goat cheese pizza. Mm-hmm. And she's like, okay. And she's already like, that's a 4-letter title to a game. And I'm like, stay with me for a second. We're just flipping cards over. And you know what? We're not going to do the special cards. Like, we're not going to do the like groundhog or whatever it may be, and let her get used to that for a second and bring it in. Like when I introduced them to Ticket to Ride, I knew, okay, this is going to be tough. We're going to get through this on the other side. And it's not that she doesn't want to learn. It's that cognitive load. She sees this huge board and is like,
so there's white noise that happens, right? It's not that they can't comprehend the rules, because the rules aren't overly complicated. It's the stress of looking stupid in front of a group of people. And this white noise gets in their head and they're not even really processing what you're explaining. Right. Yeah. My wife has this. She's told me, she's like, listen, she'll play whatever I force her to play, but she's like, I'd rather go read a book with my leisure time. I don't, and she's like, she's eventually admitted it. She's like, I'm deathly scared of looking very stupid in front of people. And I'm like, okay, well, we all need some therapy. So let's go get some, like there's some things we need to unpack out of that, because, I've got a shirt that I've made that says I play for the grins, not the wins, because I do not care if I win. I really don't. But anyway,
it's funny because when you put it that way, that's one of the reasons I don't really like hidden role and bluffing games, because I don't want to look stupid. Right? I don't want to look like, oh, you were obviously the guy, right? You were obviously the werewolf. You were obviously the sheriff. So part of the reason, Bang the Dice Game notwithstanding, because I love that game, but I will never gravitate towards hidden role games or bluffing games, because I don't want to look stupid when everybody's smarter than me or better than me at
and some
pretending
of those
to be
designed,
something. So
I don't want to call any games out, but some of those games have moments where they're not designed for you to have an out, right? Like, if you're a certain role and somebody says something and you don't respond in the exact perfect way, then everybody's going to know what you are. And, for me, that's not fun either. Right. Like, like we played, Blood on the Clock Tower a while back, and like, what an incredible game, right? Like they really did a good job of solving a lot of those problems where it's like, it's so complicated. I was a little confused most of the time, but also like, well, my confusion even played into my hand, to be able to survive. So,
What's funny, like I'm glad you broke it down. I'm going to interject before you go, Robbie. You are so right, because I am that guy that says, "Oh, this is easy to play," but I forget about, to a non-gamer, the way your preamble is. It will. Century Golem Road could be overwhelming because there's so many things. To me, this like, oh, you just do this and you do this, but to others, it's not that way. And I think in our very first episode, I'm an admitted snobby gamer who's working on my snobbiness, right? Like in the first episode, Robbie was talking about like Uno Flip or something, and I was like, I would never voluntarily play that, but if you literally called it something else and labeled it something else and it didn't have the Uno connotation, I'd probably try it out. Because I have those preconceived things in my own head, the way non-gamers may have preconceived notions. Even as the gamer of the group, I have this preconceived notion that, oh, well, I don't really like those games. There's a lot of party games I like. I rarely gravitate to them, just one. And my latest one is Green Team Wins. Those are the two that I fall back on for everything right now for those. Cause like you said, you're literally just answering a thing and it ends up being fun. But I'm glad you broke it down like that, James. Cause
I've thrown Tapple out on the table in front of a group of people after dinner, and I don't even explain the rules. I just hit the button and I go, things that are blue. And then I'm like, blueberries, bloop. And I hit B and I just I look at whoever's next to me and see if they it's like, there are, I think if we ever get our hooks into people to the point that it's like, hey, I enjoy that. Like I gave my sister that deck of Nana and said, you keep it. I'll get another copy. Go home and play it with your kids. Y'all. And she was like, really? I can keep it? I'm like, absolutely. Just keep it and go play it, because I know now for next Christmas, if they've played that a bunch, maybe then, just like we're talking about in this conversation, I can take that next step and see if we can progress a little.
So I want to clarify this. Nana that's what Trio got reimplemented as? Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. Because I didn't know what Nana was, but I had to go look up on Board Game Geek, but it's Trio for those. If you're looking for it now, it's probably the better way to possibly get that game.
Yep.
All right, Robbie, what you got?
Yeah, no, Tapple, I feel that in my soul. We have a group that goes to trivia every week, and Tapple is like, I will bring that probably once a month, and we just set it in the middle of our trivia table. And it's like, okay, which president had 4 toes? Okay. Oh, yeah, obviously that's so-and-so. And then, okay, bank. All right, let's get back to Tapple. So we did what we were supposed to, and then we're just having a good time in the middle. So
no, but that's a great idea, because I do trivia about once a month with CJ and Mandy. By the way, Jason, when you call him Christopher, I'm like, who's he talking about?
I know
he's always been CJ to me.
I know, and like if I ever say CJ accidentally, my wife looks at me like, his name is not CJ to you, it is Christopher. I was like, yes, ma'am. So he will always, but because Mandy code switches in the best way possible. Depending on who she's with, she'll use CJ or Christopher because she's so used to, because to her, he's CJ the same way it is you. So a funny little side note, I've said this before, but my brother's name is John Christopher and Christopher's name is Christopher John. It was just meant to be. Like we were meant to be brothers. Sorry.
That's awesome. Yeah, Robbie, I'm definitely taking Tapple to our next thing, because that's a perfect in between hangout waiting for the next question, because there's a lot of downtime in trivia. So that's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. We keep that, and we keep a copy of That's Not a Hat in our car at all times for the same purpose. For me, when I think of like bringing newer gamers in, I think about a lot of that. I'm with you, James, in like trying to introduce people. And I fall into the trap. For me, it's not I think this game is simpler than it is. To me, I look at it as I've had this game for so long, is how I fall into the trap of like, oh, this game's really old to me, so they were simpler back then, kind of a deal. And so trying to work through that process can be a little tricky at times. But to me, 2 that come to mind, and they're in the same universe, are Dixit and Mysterium. Because I think about Dixit and that my nephew, when he was 5 years old, was able to play Dixit with us. And when he's playing this game, did he play it to the top competitive ability? Absolutely not. Like one of our favorite things was he would give us a word that was like, all right, the word is brown. We're like, okay, so we're looking at our cards and we all play a brown card. And there's one card that's just clearly not brown. And we're like, why'd you go with that? And he was like, oh, so honestly, I thought about this, which made me think of dirt, and dirt is brown. So therefore brown. We're like, okay, but game on. So it's super fun. And I bounce between Dixit and Mysterium trying to see, am I with someone who's super competitive, or am I with someone who wants to be part of an experience? Because to me, one of my favorite parts about board gaming is the experience of it all. I think about when I first played Dinosaur Island with Jason, like being a part of that table and knowing like I'm with a family of people who love this game. Oh man. And there's a lot to process here, but like I can think of so many games that I've played at Jason's house because of the experiences of them all coming together and doing that. Whereas it's funny, in my own house, I've hosted so many game nights that I can't remember lots of those because it's just like the norm inside of my own house. And so I want people to have this gathered experience. And so since Mysterium is sort of everyone versus the game, then okay, if they're not that competitive, or we have even 2 people that are not like, oh no, then we'll do Mysterium because people can be brought along the process and to make those connections. Clue, to me, I love that you said like maybe not even Risk, James, like because Risk is so intimidating so many people. Clue feels to me like a lot of the top end. Oh, I play Clue a lot. I'm a pretty good board gamer, and it's like you are, dude. Proud of you. Way to go! Like you've got the system figured
if someone
out.
plopped out Clue, I'd be happy to play Clue right now. Like that one's always like this nostalgia, and it's
Yep.
Yeah. I'll grab that wrench and I'm just going to like just tap the wrench in front of me the whole time. It's going to be fantastic. So Mysterium definitely settles in that side. And Jason, I'll say as an aside to kind of transition us to bring you back to your next game. So I played Century Golem Edition at Jason's house. Loved it. Came home and was like, Lindsay, we're going to play Century. It's so good. But the library didn't have Golem Edition. They had the Spice Edition.
Yeah.
Significantly more complicated, like way more complicated just because there's a board that you're now like, it adds like a worker placement element to it. Whereas Golem, there's sort of just the rows that you're getting the cards from. So it's the same process. They've just added, I don't know which one came first. I would imagine Spice came first and they simplified it for Golem.
It's actually the same game, but there's 3 games in the series. It sounds like you got the second game, which adds a lot more. I won't say a lot more, but it definitely ramps up the complexity because Golem and Spice are just the art, and they made 2 different art versions of it.
Yep.
But yeah, I think you grabbed the second game, not the first game, because the first game in both editions, because for some reason I ended up with both of them at one time in my life. Are the same exact game, just different skin.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
That'll explain it for sure.
Well, there you go. If you're hunting it down, know that there are 2 versions.
And what's cool about those 3 games, right? They play independently of each other, but they Voltron if you get all 3 and you can put them into one big game epic experience. I never got around to that, but it was a cool concept.
Yeah, I've never played any of the other 2 ones either for no good or bad reason, but I always like the idea of trying to combine those together for sure.
I played all 3 of them individually, and I really just love the simplicity of the first one.
Yep. For sure. All right, well let's talk about simplicity. Let's move it up to that next level, and of course now James has got, not in a bad way, but in a good way, like my level of games that I'm about to talk about based on James' accurate preamble is heavier, but I've used this to introduce newer gamers, folks who've played games before, like the Ticket to Rides, like the Carcassonnes, right? What I would call that entry level, even though I know it's a little bit higher. These 2 games are ones I've introduced them to. And even though they're 2 separate games, they're very similar. Other games, I'll preface this by saying the game we talked about in a previous episode, Lords of Waterdeep, is one of those games I've introduced folks to. Flamecraft, and they're the game we've covered on the podcast. Another one that you can introduce to with amazing art, amazing production, whether you get the retail edition or the Kickstarter edition. But another one that we've talked about on the fringes multiple times and will eventually be a featured game on the podcast is Wormspan/Wingspan. Between teaching Brad, a coworker, between teaching Dakota, between teaching some other disc golf friends, Reed and Luke, who are all entry-level gamers, or Reed's a heavier gamer, it's enough that if you've been experienced with it, you can now try this other level of game. Now, I think on the complexity level, it's like probably 2.6 or 2.7 on a BGG has a 1 to 5 complexity skill level. Century Golem Edition, I'll even look it up for the heck of it. It's 1.6. Wormspan, Wingspan are probably in that upper close to 3, if not slightly over 3, because there's so much going on. But if they want that next level of challenge, because you're managing resources, you have hidden goals you're doing, you're activating an engine, you're creating an engine, and then activating that engine as you go with so many things to do. I love the variety of all those things, and the art in both of those games is amazing. Of course, I mean I still remember seeing the Wingspan box at Barnes & Noble and thinking that's one of the coolest game covers I've ever seen in my life. It's still one of my favorite game covers I've ever seen. The strikingness of that bird is amazing. I introduced it to Brad, my coworker, who went hardcore deep into it. Did I teach you as well, Robbie, Wingspan? And then you went crazy deep in it for a little while as well. So a couple of my friends' addictions to that game were thankful to me. But it gives you enough variety that you can see the heavier level of all these different mechanisms that get played in games. And I would say Wormspan is my more favorite right now, but I could play either one and not have any issue with one or the other. I play a ton of Wingspan on BGA. Absolutely love Wingspan on BGA, so I'm playing through a ton of it right now. So those are two ones that are my go-to ones to do that next level of gaming. What you got for us, James?
Well, I feel like I always have to start my section off with a TED Talk. But so, part of this, I think I'm going to surprise you because my two choices here are probably big jumps compared to the preamble I just gave on the last category. But I think at the point where that cognitive load is and the white noise of the people that you're playing with, these are people that I'm assuming you've played some games with, right? Like you kind of know their level of rules explanations and yeah, you might be stretching it to see. I wouldn't categorize it, Jason, as to challenge or to be the next challenge. It's more just to see, in my opinion, it's more like Sherlock Holmesing, or like filling out a Tinder. Not that I've been married for 25 years. I don't know anything about filling out a dating profile, but it's more like filling out that dating profile to see maybe there's, maybe you've never had sushi before. And if the first time you take a bite of sushi, you're like, sweet baby Jesus, this is the best thing I've ever ate in my life. Now I love sushi and I'm looking for sushi restaurants all the time. And so for me, this is more like I want to help them on their journey of discovery. And so like my two choices in this category are Blood Rage and Rococo. Okay. Obviously two very different categories, but again, that dating profile, that DJ analogy from earlier, it's along the lines of, are they leaning more math, Euro, engine building? They like games like that. Do they like fighting, interaction, strategy? Then we're going Blood Rage, right? And I think one of the key things about this stage, if you're trying to help someone level up, however we want to say it, is that whatever game that you're introducing them to, intimately. It's a game that you don't even need the rule book to teach them the game, because nothing kills momentum more when you're trying to get somebody to get outside their comfort zone is to get partially through a rules explanation and you goof it up because you forgot or you don't know it really well. Or if you're like, wait a minute, I don't remember this part, and you're reading the rule book for 5 minutes while they're like that just kills all momentum. So for me, these two games, Blood Rage and Rococo, I don't need a rule book. Plop that sucker down on the table and I can teach it to you right now. And I think those are just along the level of where I would want to take somebody who's just been playing a lot of entry level games to see, like, let's see what direction you want to go from there. And then if they're like, ooh, I love this one, hated that one, then you get to branch off from there, I feel like, on the next time. If they're, or stay in that zone for a bit longer, get them comfortable there. And then you're like, all right, welcome to Twilight Imperium 4. We're going to be here for 19 hours.
What is, we actually talked about, ironically, Blood Rage, and the last one is a game I'd played lately, and I loved it because I've heard great things about it. I know Christopher was telling me about it. You guys had a BGA game of it a while back or something we were talking about. And I even shot him the score because I absolutely blitzed my wife and son both games. Don't know how. I had a great time. So the gameplay didn't, when you lose, it's not always great.
3-player at that game, I don't play it at 3-player.
Yeah, that's what we discovered.
There's too many people can be left alone. Sounds like you got left alone, right? When you play it at 5, nobody's getting left alone. Yeah. Nobody's sneaking away with easy points in that. And that's
we went and looked it up, and because 3 is like, okay, it's okay, but you're not forced into those conflicts. You're not forced into those ratings or whatever they're called. So Blood Rage was great. It went to the top of the list to play with Robbie when he gets here, but at least at 4-player, because Ryder's going to come back, so at least we'll have a 4-player game of it. Though I do have the 5-player expansion. What is Rococo? I've seen people talk about it, but if you don't can you give a quick 30-second pitch on how to play or what Rococo is?
Yeah, you're in like the French Renaissance, and you're making dresses and outfits for the ball, and it's just a really elegant. There was an older version, and then they redid it about 5 years ago. It has a deluxe edition. I highly recommend that one, but I think the gameplay is essentially the same in both. But it just has a really elegant card system where it's kind of deck building. So we all start out with the same cards. They have different power levels. And then as you play them, only certain types of cards can do certain types of actions. But there's a market to get new cards. So you're like, am I going to spend one of my really good cards this round to go get another really good card? You're gathering the resources, you're making the dresses. It has a little bit of area control into the ballrooms where you're putting stuff out. But it plays in like 90 minutes. So for me, it's like, if I'm playing a long game these days, 90 minutes is kind of like my sweet spot. And I can teach that to new players and still get that in and around the 90-minute mark. And I feel like that's a really good cutoff mentally for, I'm going to try to take somebody, 2-3 hours, and I'll even say Wonderland's War, while it's my baby, it can go long because there's a lot of cognitive load when you're trying to choose which card you want in the tea party phase. And I've seen people lock down and like, guys, it's just a board game.
Right.
Just pick a card.
Yes.
Put some stuff out.
Yep.
You'll be all right.
Yep.
I've heard people playing 5-6 hour sessions of Wonderland's War, and I'm like, how? It's not possible. But anyway, I think that 90-minute thing is great. I think that theme is really approachable, for similar to like Wingspan, French Revolution era, and making fancy dresses. That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
I've never heard about a board game about making fancy dresses. So
very cool.
Yeah. I'm the theme guy of our podcast. I am all about a theme. I lean into it. In fact, when we critique games and we're looking at games and evaluating them, evaluating is probably a better word than critique, but when we're looking at it, I was like, we have to put theme on the docket, because there are folks out there that if you can grab a good theme, man, it's just so much easier to put that hook or that invitation out to draw people in. So I struggled here because I really like to nail it down to one, because I think about it in the way of, before we started recording, listeners, we were telling James that the platform we use, we record, for a disc golf podcast as well. And that disc golf podcast, the goal, my co-host and I, we bring people in as if you were going to a golf, like a PGA Superstore, and getting fitted for clubs. So we look at their bag, we analyze it all, and we're like, okay, so you like these, you might consider using a disc like this, and alternating accordingly. And it's funny because that's really what I try to do in board games as well. When I introduce people, is I'm constantly it's very rare for me to end up at a table with someone that I don't like, especially in my house, that I don't know, or have some inclination on what they like and whatnot. So nailing this to okay, do we want someone who loves that gotcha vibe? Do we want someone who wants less of or they want to play single player solitaire, things like that? How do we adjust it? So Call to Adventure was near the top of the list for me, because I love introducing people to that. Easy to get into the theming and the role play of it all. And the system of rolling runes instead of dice is a fun alternative to kind of introduce people. People are familiar with the idea of dice chucking because of the Yahtzees and the Monopolies of the world. But now when I'm casting runes, I get the same tactile sensation without the inconsistency that is the consistency of dice. So I like Call to Adventure. Not necessarily one I go to. I thought about Small World as well, because even though it's a gotcha element, you can't ever get eliminated from Small World, which I think is just one of the coolest mechanics out there, because it's like, oh, I got decimated this turn because everyone somehow decided to go for me. Sick. Go into decline, grab a new race, and punch right back at them. So that's always a fun side of it. But I think truly the one that I land on, and Jason will call it the game that he always forgets that he loves, is Five Tribes. Five Tribes, that 90-minute mark, James, couldn't agree more. I think about it in movies. When I go to watch a movie at the theater, if you tell me that the movie is 2 hours and 5 minutes, I'm like, that's a time. But if you told me it was an hour and 45 minutes, I'm like, perfect. That's the ideal length for a movie. Here we go. We went and saw the Fly Me to the Moon movie with Scarlett Johansson and Channing Tatum, and the unanimous review of our group was, it was just 20 minutes too long. And I think there are lots of board games out there that can feel it's just 20 minutes too long. There was one extra turn that I didn't need. And Five Tribes, so fun. It gives you a mechanic that's just not necessarily out there in a lot. And I would say I've not played Rococo. I've not played Blood Rage. but just based on the Mancala element, this is probably up there in the complexity level. I don't know what it is on BGG, but just because you have the different pieces and things like that. But I know how Five Tribes works. I love that quote, James, of you got to know that game at your core because you don't want to, when I'm explaining the different pieces. So Five Tribes will always be up there for me. Very fun. And there's just so many ways to win that game that I love that anyone who can come in, some aspect of the game can really draw everyone in. Oh, you don't like attacking other people? Go with the builders. Go with the market. Okay, awesome. Oh, you don't want to really interact with anyone. You just want to have like so many extra powers. Go the Jin route. Like you can connect on a lot of that. I don't know how you feel about. I'm guessing you've played Five Tribes, James.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a great game. It's actually been a few years since that was actually one of those games I would put in the category of my onboarding about 10 years ago when I really started getting into board games for the first time. And it's actually CJ and their group that really I played Catan with Mandy and CJ at a dinner party one night. Hated it a lot at the time because I fell into that category of like I'd only ever played Monopoly or anything else, right? And then like we're gonna play this. And I just felt like it just went on forever, right? Like I didn't get any sort of midway segue to like bring me in and up. It was just dump me right into that. But yeah,
it's one that we've talked about many times, and eventually it'll be a featured game on here because I do love Five Tribes because there are so many different things. And if you play with the same people, they'll fall into their same what they like to do. But sometimes you just play what's on the board. But I mean, for those who are listening and first talk about it, if you play with folks who struggle with analysis paralysis, this is a game that's going to slow them down even more because every move, every turn you take for the first 3/4 of the game, there's like 20 moves you could take that each could do different good things. And so they're literally mathing out every possible move. So that's a little spoiler for when we do talk about it. It can, if you play with games people who struggle with AP, that's a game that will go very slow for you because the board constantly changes as well. In their defense, every move I make a move, now the board has changed and now they got to rethink all their moves. And the next person goes, but I think that's a good call. It is actually a 2.8 because there's so much in the weight, Robbie, because there's just so much you can do in Five Tribes. The gameplay is easy, quote unquote, but there's with every single one of those tribes that can do different things, it definitely amps that complexity up. But it's a great choice. I have not played it. I don't know if I've even played it since in a few years because I ended up selling my expansions because they were going really well and I needed more money to buy more games. So I sold some of my expansions because they were out of print the way that world works. And so I don't even know how long it's been since I've even played Five Tribes, but it's a great one.
It's funny because I wouldn't in my head because I'm so familiar with that game. Yep. You could not convince me that it's more complicated than Wingspan because of how many cards there are, especially if you include any expansions in Wingspan. Like it gets so crazy. But I'll pivot, and as a closing remark, I want to put the two of you on the spot here. What's a game to you that you have found or people have called you out for? Like you just can't get past it's so simple to you. And whenever you've like dropped this to the table, it's happened to you maybe multiple times of like, that was a lot. Like, that was a little more complicated. What's your blind spot game? I guess I should say in terms of complication. Because Five Tribes, I'm guessing it sounds like Five Tribes just sits there for me.
Five Tribes definitely be. I would say that's a good one, a good question, and I agree. Because even when I think about Five Tribes, because you have to explain each of the people and what they do. Hey, I'm gonna look. I got to think real quick. An easy one, honestly, because even though it was literally on my list, was Quacks. I think Quacks is much easier to play than it truly is. Now, I've never had someone really dislike it after they played it, but I truly, because the concept of, okay, you put this 1 to 2 pieces away. People struggle to get that idea as you're putting your chips out. It's not 1 away, it's 2 away. And more often than not, I realize, oh, wow, they put out a 3, but they put it 1 away because they forgot. And then because those chips, those ingredients do so many different things, but I played it so much. I don't even look at the rule book. That's the game that I don't need to look at the rule book at all. I mean, to double check what the thing says. Okay, this one does that. Okay. But I know it like the back of my hand. So I take for granted that it is more complex than it truly is.
For me, it's probably, I me going against my own advice initially, Dwellings of Eldervale. I love that game. So if there's anybody that I'm like, can I stretch these 3 other people into playing this, even if it's a little outside of their comfort zone?
Right.
I selfishly want to play it, and so then I've definitely, because it's a weird mix of Euro and Ameritrash kind of categories where you're doing a lot of that tableau building. So there's a lot to explain on the Euro tableau building side of things. But then I'm like, oh wait, but there's more. Now we can fight each other. There's dice rolling. There's combat. There's punching monsters. And so I think a lot of it just ends up being a lot of cognitive load, even for regular gamers.
Right.
And it's one of those games too. Like if I don't explain one of the rules just right, or it's interpreted, then there's some feel bads when, like, I thought I could do this, or I thought the combat was going to go X way, but now the thing that I was trying to do to help my engine building got ruined.
Right.
And now I, and that, so there's just to know that that's in that game. I should probably know better the personalities that want that sort of thing.
Yep. That's a good one, because I haven't shown that to Robbie yet. But whenever I think about dwellings, that's an easy one to play. But then when you start rereading everything, it's, as you said, there's so many little easy things, but that cognitive load can overload even me, because as you were explaining, I'm like, you're right, there's that, and I forgot that. So it's one, because the production and the art is just amazing. That is one I love to play, but I don't pull out enough because there's enough little things. And I think it's easier to understand than it truly is, because there's so many things. And I can say this because Elizabeth doesn't listen. If I miss a rule and it hurts Elizabeth, she will not forgive me for the rest of that game. And so she's one of those that if there's a little rule that me and Ryder knew or remembered and she missed, or I said once and she missed it, she will be very upset at us. So there's enough little things in that game that if we played it now, we'd have to play it like twice in a row. Like that's our new thing at our house. If I put a game out, especially unless it's a game we know, like we would probably wouldn't play 5 tribes twice in a row, but a game we haven't played a lot of or haven't played in a while, we'll play it once, leave it out, play it one more time the next night. That we're kind of seasoned in, and if we've missed anything.
Yeah.
Well, James, we want to say thank you for coming on. I personally really enjoyed this conversation, and I think our listeners are going to enjoy it as well. Just as it's some really good reminders and obviously some fantastic game suggestions on bringing people in, because that's, as we continue to develop this podcast of trying to help put tools in people's hands to help get more people to the table. It's not always, we don't really talk, we give game suggestions, but we don't really talk about the process of getting people to the table. And I think you've given some people some really good verbiage that they can use to kind of help bring it in.
I mean, it's what we do when we're making games, right? We have to think about, like, who are we making this game for? Who's our market for this game? I mean, it gets businessy, but like, if you don't, you end up making a game that's all over the place, right? And that'll, you can see that in the BGG scores, or you can see it in the feedback from players when you don't really hone it down to what is its core essence, what is it trying to do.
Right. And
I think there's a lot of that we can take some grains of that in our hobby, having fun time, right? And be like, I'm never going to try to go make that guy in my group who hates high interaction play Blood Rage, because they're going to have a bad time, right? They're not going to enjoy themselves. And then vice versa on a Euro game. So, and I've got a friend who's like that. He's already said, when we go to Dragon Con, he's like, all right, I'm bringing Nemesis and Blood Rage and Rising Sun. And, it's like, when you guys want to go play all those stupid Euro games, go to the other table. I'll find some people who want to play this,
Right. So true. And I'm even though I liked Blood Rage, I'm not the guy that really likes conflict. We don't play a lot of conflict. I didn't grow up playing Risk, so in principle, and we just don't play a lot of conflict based games because it was tough with kids. We played King of Tokyo. We reviewed that a while back, and my review wasn't that great, or at least my rating wasn't great. Not the review, because King of Tokyo is a great game. It teaches so many things, Yahtzee style dice rolling. But I realized direct conflict is not our style. And now that we're empty nesters, we're playing more 2-player games. There's a lot of 2-player dueling games. But Liz and I realize we don't really want to do the game. We're attacking each other until somebody's eliminated. Lorcana can be that way, but Lorcana's really more about learning lore. But there are other games where we do that, where you're basically just trying to eliminate someone else. And so we've realized that's not me and Liz.
I wouldn't recommend for you guys our next game then, Mad Kala, as it is a 1v1.
Yep.
dueling game, but it is more casual and lighter and easier to play.
Yeah, I've watched because I saw that you've been posting about it, and like, yeah, I may back it, could happily back you guys, but then I would give it to Robbie so that he can play it with somebody else. So, because it's just not our style of game where I like the heavier your games. I will say this though, with your permission, James, there will be no doubt the word cognitive load will now be in every podcast we talk about the rest of We Do It, because it's so accurate. The description used was so accurate when we talk about games, as well as the white noise that comes into play with all that stuff. Those two terms, with your permission, we will. I doubt we'll have another podcast we don't use those.
When I'm teaching a game, right? When I'm teaching a game for the first time to people, especially if I don't know them, right? I make sure I make some sort of statement to try to alleviate pressure, right? Like, hey, nobody's going to the Super Bowl of board games in this game. We're all here just try to have a good time. So don't worry about, like I always say, this is a learning game, or, it doesn't matter if you like take even a little note there to help them feel like the pressure's taken off. So that white noise might get reduced. They'll hear your rule set better, and then they'll perform better, and then they'll have more fun. And then they might want to play games with you again. And at the end of the day, we just need a Rolodex of people we can play games with, because we just want to play games.
So
it's
true.
all very selfish.
So true.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, James, we want to let you close it out with shameless plugs. Anything people can follow you? You got Mad Kala coming up. How can the people support you and what you're doing?
We got so much happening right now. You can find me typically either under Druid City Games or James Matthew Hudson or James Hudson on most of the social medias. Title Blades 2 is about to hit in the next month or two. So if you like big epic campaign narrative dungeon crawl type games with a much different look than what you're used to, because it's very anime and bright, I think it's the best game we've ever made. I think it's amazing. I think people are going to be absolutely blown away. Mad Call is our next Kickstarter that is coming up probably in September, early October. And then right after that, I'm going to have Bloodstone. It's my baby. It's the game I've been working. It was actually the first game I ever designed. We had a whole thing that happened, but now it's ready to come back. So, there's a lot going on. And then obviously Wonderlands of War is now I partner with All Play. They're the people who make the tables and lots of other games. They're my web store now. So like you can go to All Play, you can find Druid City. All of my stuff's there. Easy to get.
I want to do one more plug for a game that's not getting a lot of play, but that Christopher brought and played, which is Title Blades Banner Festival. Super cool. I love the card selection and how that you're choosing the turn order to go around in it. Of course, the Title Blades world is it Mr. Cuddington who's the Title Blades world.
Yeah, that's right.
The art is amazing, right? It's the Title Blades art is just some of the most unique and cool art you can see in gaming. But to see that in a very approachable, and welcoming game like Title Blades Banner Festival, I don't see a lot of people talking about that. But I don't own it yet because I'm on a self-imposed game sabbatical from buying games, to be clear. Like I bought like a couple of Stonemaier things, but other than that, because I've been waiting for them, but I'm on a sabbatical for buying games. But it is one that's near the top of the list that eventually I'll get Banner Festival, because when Christopher brought that out, because I think he had played like a prototype early with you, but then at Christmas he brought it when he came up, and when we opened his game and punched it there and played it, and I was like, this is this very quick game, but very light, but fun, like welcoming and super cool art. So that's another one. I saw it's out on the All Play store, so check out Banner Festival. It's a cool one as well.
Here for it. Well, James, thank you again for coming on. Guys, check them out. We'll have links to everything in the description. But we thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you guys in 2 weeks for episode number 27. Have a good one.